Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we have a very special guest, Professor Victor Davis Hanson. He's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution and someone who obviously we all know and love. His latest book is called The End of Everything: How Wars Descend into Annihilation. And Victor is someone who, last time he was here, we got lots of messages and emails and text messages saying how they were touched that besides the analysis, besides his words of wisdom, the fact that he was with us and supporting us in Israel was really, really touching. So thank you so much, Victor, and it's great to have you.
Thank you for having me again.
Victor, I want to start with saying today at the DNC, we're recording this on Tuesday, which is the day after President Biden gave a speech. It's basically his farewell speech, and in the speech, he said that the pro-Hamas protesters have a point. And the question is, I think, on every normal person's mind is how the President of the United States, how he got to a point where the leader of the free world, the leader of the United States, is saying that people who support a genocidal terrorist organization they have a point. What is happening to the leading party right now, at least in the U.S., that this is legitimate and that the President of the United States feels that he needs to say that these terror sympathizers have a point?
Well, there's short-term exegesis and long-term. So the long-term was that two things are happening. First of all, we in the United States went not into DEI woke proportional representation admission to our universities, but we did repertory. That meant that the people who were admitted to our elite campuses were not based on the old 12% black, 20% Latino. They were, and say at Stanford where I worked, 20% white, even though that rubric was 67 to 70% of the demographic. So what that meant was Jewish students were lumped in and discriminated on the basis of being white. So when you look at the Jewish presence on campuses that used to be 20 to 30% on a meritocratic basis, it's down to 6 or 7. But that unfortunately coincided with full paying tuition plus oil Gulf money from the elite of the Middle East. So we have almost 250,000 students from the Middle East. At the same time, the Jewish presence is reduced on campus. That presence is huge. And then we have over 10 to 15 billion dollars in Gulf money, much of it from Saudi, Kuwait, and Qatar, that are endowing these Middle East programs. So when you look at these demonstrations, the embryo of it comes out of the university, and they supply critical settler theory, critical colonial theory to what are largely useful idiots. These are people, young students, that are led by Middle East students, but the nexus is all of these elite campuses that have this influence. So that was a long-term, the demographics, and that means if you're at Stanford University, you see 10 Jewish students and they have a booth and they're trying to inform people, and they're very polite, they follow the rules. When the university says close down at 5, they do, and they're right next to 300 students with a huge quarter-acre encampment that just say, screw you, we're going to stay here. And they confront people, they yell, they scream, they use obscenities, kill the Jew, all of that. And the universities are terrified of them. So but the short term is that the Democratic Party is in an election year, and everybody understands that it will be decided in 8 or 9 states. And it looks like, for all of the polls and publicity, that Kamala Harris has got momentum. If you look at the Real Clear Politics average, Donald Trump is dead even in the national polls, and he has leads in 7 of these 9 states. And it looks like he can win Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina. And that's going to mean that there's going to be 3 states in play. And he has to win either Michigan, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania. And there is a large group of, as you know, 250,000 to 300,000 voters in Michigan. And so the Democratic Party, and these are not the radicals in the party, these are the realists. They say, you know what, we're going to put up with it. So Joe, in your speech, defer to those people outside, because the people in Michigan are one-issue voters. We cannot lose. If we lose Michigan, we lose the election. And what they have also said, to be frank, they have said to their 70 to 75% Jewish supporters, who traditionally are very loyal to the Democratic Party, we don't believe that you will cause us trouble. You never do. You never protest. You're always law-abiding. You're very loyal in donating to our causes. And we can take you for granted, because we're going to call Donald Trump, as we saw last night, Charlottesville, 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 anti-Semitic, anti-Semitic. And even though that's been debunked when he said, there were fine people on both sides, and I'm not talking about the Semite they just cut that out. So that's the calculus, and we'll see if it works for them. But what I think the subtext of all this is, they have had 110% positive coverage. They have not allowed her to have a press conference, a town hall, a non-scripted interview. They have rigged the primary, so they nullified. She's never run in one primary in her life, and they know that she cannot speak extemporaneously for more than a minute without embarrassing herself. So it's going to be 2020 redux. They've substituted somebody who was cognitively declined from someone who's linguistically declined. And both of them, the only unfortunate thing is it involves Israel. Joe Biden, the octogenarian, still has contacts with the Jewish American community, and he has, not now, but he did at one point support Israel. These new people who are around Kamala Harris and Walz do not like Israel. They're pro-Hamas, and they feel that's the future of the party. And this is something the Iranians are looking at this, Hamas is looking at this, Hezbollah is looking at this, the Houthis are looking at this, the Chinese are looking at this, the Russians are looking at this, the Turks are looking at this, and they can't quite figure out what their move is. The irony is, as I look at it, I don't necessarily think Israel is in a unfortunate strategic position, because if they get in an existential war, the United States bureaucracy or the military or the diplomat, they will ultimately give help as they did before. They may be tardy. They're sort of like the Secret Service that protects Trump. They're lackadaisical, but they have to. And the same thing with the military. But I think what's happening right now, Iran is in this strategic impasse, because they think, well, the United States has distanced themselves, but to what degree does that figure if we attack full out? In a weird way, the Iranians are thinking, well, Israel's kind of liberated from the United States now. Since the United States has polarized them, we don't know what they're doing. And we know that they're capable of inflicting enormous damage on us. And if we do what we did last time, the United States will not have the ability to restrain them, but it also might step in if things got really heated, and we would get the worst of both worlds. We would get the United States in extremis at the 11th hour saying, you know what, whether we like it or not, we're going to protect Israel from being destroyed, but we're not going to have any influence on their retaliatory calibration. And so that's why I think that I don't see Israel in a bad strategic position right now, is what I'm saying.
Another question I have about the DNC is that one of the attack lines on the Democrats had on the Republicans, on J.D. Vance, was they kept on saying that he was weird, quote unquote. They kept on saying this. They obviously think that this is poll tested, this works. And yet when we look at the DNC, we see they're giving out free abortions, free vasectomies on the one side. On the other side, like we mentioned, the pro-Hamas protesters. So the fact is that it's very projection, that it seems that everything that they call the other side is something that they do themselves. It's very, very weird to give out free vasectomies and free abortion pills in the middle of the street. And on the other side of the street, people are protesting in favor of a genocidal, fanatical religious terrorist organization. So what do you think about this discrepancy of the fact that it seems to me that it's total projection that they're doing?
Yes, and I wrote an article today called "The Projectionist." It's out today and yesterday, the projectionist campaign, because they do the same thing on the border. They do this Freudian tick where they say, we're completely vulnerable on the border. We let 10 million people in to change the demographic. We destroyed the wall. We did everything. We stopped the building of the wall, catch and release. Therefore, we're going to say Donald Trump is soft on the border. And same thing on energy. They canceled the Anwar project, the Keystone project. They drained the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And then suddenly, as the election came up, they said, pump full blast and blame Donald Trump. Same thing on inflation. They inherited 1.2% inflation. They went up to 9% prices on staples. Food, insurance, fuel is 30% higher than it was when they took office. And now they're blaming Trump for high inflation. They said they've reduced it. They've reduced the rate of inflation, but prices have stayed sky high. And that there's an explanation for that. Their policies, their agenda are not based on human nature. Most people want a secure border. They want criminals punished for deterrence. They prefer the United States to reflect a pro-Western values, and that would include Europe, the former British Commonwealth, Japan, South Korea, Israel. And they do not want to subsidize, give, or align with radical Islamicists, the Chinese, etc. So they know that their agendas have no popular support. So they have to dissimulate. And one of the methodologies of dissimulation is projectionism. Whatever they're most vulnerable at, they accuse someone else of that very crime. And then in addition to that, for 90 days, Kamala Harris is a conservative. She's saying, I was tough on the border. I was tough on crime. I really want to pump as much gas as I can. And that's going to end in 90 days, whether she wins or loses. If she loses, the Biden-Harris administration, remember, still has 3 months, and they will double down in anger, and they will pursue the left wing. If she wins, she doesn't care anymore because she feels if she wins, she'll probably win the Senate if she wins, and she will just continue on flipping and go back to her left wing. Well, one thing is a constant. She will not, everything as she's saying in the next 80 days, she will not adhere to after the election, one way or the other.
Victor, do you think that these protests, you mentioned the polls and where the race is right now, but when we see the protests at the DNC, when we see the craziness there, the weirdness that we just mentioned, do you think that it might have a effect in the polls? Usually we see a bounce in the polls after someone has their convention. Do you think that if people see, even though the media isn't showing it, even though but people see their social media and they see what's happening maybe on a lesser scale than they would have with a more balanced media, but do you think this will have any effect on the polls?
I think it'll give Trump did in his convention earlier, every convention gives 2 to 3 points. We know that. And right now, as I looked this morning, it's 46.4 national, 46.3 to Trump. And then in the swing states, if you look at how that's projected under the Electoral College, Trump wins by about 40 electoral votes. I expect her to go up about 2 or 3 points for the next week, depending on whether there's violence or not. It's very mysterious because there's over 150,000 of these people who claim they're going to be very violent. I don't think they will. And I go back to the Molly Bell 2021 triumphalist essay in Time magazine when she said in writing, we had a cabal and a conspiracy, and we really won the election because we were able to get the Chamber of Commerce, the establishment to attack Trump. We were able to use social media to discourage news reports. And she said, we were able to modulate the demonstrations depending on how they were useful or not useful for Biden. So I think they're desperately offering all sorts of incentives of these people to behave, and we'll see whether they do or not. But all that said, the problem is twofold. They have an agenda that no one wants, and the polls reflect that. They're down 10% on the economy, 15% on the border, 10% on crime. And they have a candidate that can't speak extemporaneous. We have to remember that until July 21st, when Biden was removed, the Biden official narrative was he's perfectly cognitive and we couldn't remove him anyway if we wanted because she's totally incompetent. They were leaking that every day. 48 hours later, Joe is selfish, but now he's not selfish. He's Washingtonian. He got out. He's not. He's noble. He's gone, and we had to get him out because he was going to hurt us in the polls, and we were going to lose the election. And he was not able. He's okay to be president for the next 5 months. That's okay, but not for our party's candidate. And then she's brilliant. She's the second coming of Obama. So for the next 4.5 weeks, they kept her off the campaign trail. She's had two unscripted moments. One, she talked about the art of diplomacy, about the hostages from Russia, and she said the art of diplomacy is why Joe Biden is so effective, because the art of diplomacy is so important, and I'm a big advocate of the art of that kind of stuff. And so, and now they let her have one other unscripted speech when she said she wants price controls. Food markets in America have a 1% to 2% margin. The inflation is caused by mandatory labor increases in states like California, where the minimum wage went to $20 an hour, the doubling of diesel fuel and gas fuel, 40% increase in electricity under them. But the actual farmer return, even the so-called middleman, hasn't been very high. And that won't work. We know that wage and price. She said that now we're seeing every day. She said that she wants to cancel patents. That's against the law, but she said if a patent raises drug prices, we're going to tell the pharmaceuticals we can just snatch that patent and turn it over to all of the companies, which is illegal. She said that she wants to control wages so that if she finds a firm that has a 1% disparity between what a woman and a man makes, then she's going to, for each percentage in disparity, she's going to take that away from the firm. And it goes on and on. The problem that Trump is having is the people around him, and he knows that he has to stick to these two issues, her policies and her inability to articulate anything cognizant or coherent. But what he does is he does that 80% of the time, and then he goes off script and says she's stupid, she's dumb. And then the next hour, all of the media say Trump makes fun of black woman, calls her dumb, and that eats up 5 hours of the news cycle. And he's only got 80 days to do this. So they're playing what we call in America fourth quarter football. They think they're ahead and they're going to run out the clock. They're actually tied. The only way that Trump can beat her is to stick on message and get ahead 3 to 4 points in the polls. If he gets 3 to 4 points, even in the swing states, even if he's behind, but if he's ahead in the swing states by 3 or 4, she will have to come out. And, just as a point of our esoteric history, in 1988, Mike Dukakis was passed off by the Democrats against incumbent George, he was not an incumbent, he was Vice President George Bush, the elder. And he said he was a technocrat from Massachusetts. He had accomplished the Massachusetts miracle. He was not ideological. It was about competence, not ideology. And he was 17 points ahead at this date when he came out of the Democratic Convention. And they didn't know what to do because George H.W. Bush played by the Marquess of Queensberry rules. And suddenly they found this fellow, Lee Atwater, who had a Southern accent, and they all thought he was beyond the pale, but they brought him in, and in a series of ads, he said, this man has polluted his own harbor. He had a picture. He's in a tank. Look at his bobblehead helmet on. It's a joke. Look at Willie Horton. He let out this criminal who then raped and killed. And then Dukakis had to come out. And then in the debate, they said, what would you do if somebody killed or raped your wife? And he was just deer in the headlights. And he was a much better candidate, and he had much finer character than Kamala Harris. And he imploded. So if they're willing to do that and they have that type of skill with ads, she'll come out and then she will not do as well as he did. And he didn't do very well, Dukakis. So it's 80 days. We'll see.
Do you think the difference between that time and this is that the media, even though then they were still left-leaning, today they're in the tank? It seems that they don't even question her, so maybe it won't affect anything. Also, have you ever seen a media so in the tank for a presidential candidate where she doesn't even take one question pretty much for a whole month, and the media is fine with it just covering for her? What have you ever seen anything like this in your life?
No, this is a different media now. They believe that their ends of moral superiority and mandated equality and wokeness is so noble and so important that any means necessary can be justified, and the media fuses. So you got to remember that the Russian collusion lie in 2016 was media generated. BuzzFeed and people did that. And then we went into the Russian collusion, the laptop disinformation in 2020 when 51 CIA authorities or intelligence authorities lied and said that the Russians were working with Trump to create an artificial Hunter laptop, and the hard drive. It was a complete lie, but they censored the media. This time it was Silicon Valley, Facebook, the old Twitter. And then in that process, the media had ginned up 2 impeachments. They tried him as a private citizen. Then there were 5 civil and criminal trials, all media generated. All would have never been, no indictments had he been conservative, or if he just said, I'm not going to run again, they would have dropped it. And then after that, we had 16 states, never had that happen before, tried to remove his name from the primary ballot and the general ballot. That was declared unconstitutional. So here we go now. We've had a person who, if you call Trump Hitler every single day, which the media basically does, and you have a lackadaisical, for some reason, Secret Service. So you have a guy who shoots 8 times at him, and the reaction in the hard left is, I wish he had hit him. Now you've got a climate where any deranged person out there thinks, if I were to shoot Donald Trump, I would be hailed as a Hitler side, a very famous person, and if a 20-year-old can shoot off 8 shots that close, then maybe I could do better. So the result is that, people don't know whether Trump should be at a rally. They don't know who's going to do anything to it. It's a very tense situation. But all of this is media generated. So when Donald Trump was shot, the first thing the media said was there were loud noises. And then the second thing they said is, we're not sure whether he was hit or not. And then finally, maybe it was a piece of glass that hit him, not a bullet, and et cetera, et cetera. And then they tried to say that this person was a far-right white supremacist, even though he had given money to the left. And so it's very hard to break through that iron. We use the term Iron Dome here, your term, because it's an Iron Dome media protective shield over her. And but they at some point, you see, they're media narcissists, so they do want to interview, or they want to have a softball interview. They want 20 million audience, and they want to say, we were the ones that really won the election with this great interview. But she won't even give them that. So now you're starting to see people like Jim Costa and people on MSNBC saying, well, why don't you speak to us? And the subtext is, we will help you. But she doesn't even trust herself. And now it's become a kind of a psychological fixation, passive aggressive, or she doesn't know whether she should do it or not. And the more she thinks about it, and the more she's afraid that she can't do it, the worse it gets. And again, the 2 appearances that she had were catastrophic. They were a joke. You should look at Joe Biden's face when he's listening to her, or the other one when Tim Walz was listening to her talk about democracy. He just thought, quit, immediately, stop.
I want to ask you also about Tim Walz and the reason why she picked him. It seemed to me that there was 2 candidates. One was Shapiro and one was Walz, and she picked Walz, even though Shapiro is the obvious choice electoral-wise. And what was leaked was that the Palestinian issue was the one that he was too pro-Israel, Shapiro, And yet when we look at their actual positions over the years, Walz and Shapiro pretty much have the same position publicly. And so the only real reason that we could think of or deduce from that is that she didn't pick him because he was a Jew. So how do you think of that?
Yeah, that's right. That if Donald Trump wins the election, I think he will still, it'll be largely because of that decision, because you had two governors. One was in an irrelevant electoral college. Minnesota has gone the last 40 years for its left wing. It's got a large Muslim community itself. It was not going to go Republican. Pennsylvania has 19 electoral votes. It's got almost as much as Wisconsin and Michigan put together, and it is volatile. And Josh Shapiro is got a 63% popularity rating. I think he's a man of the left, but he's been very adroit at moderating on a particular, for big issues on taxes or crime, and he's moderated himself. He's kind of thread the needle on Israel. He said that Netanyahu, of course, is satanic, that type of stuff, but therefore he supports Israel. But the problem that everybody doesn't like Israel, it's only because of Netanyahu. That's what they do in the left, that the old Democratic left. The new Democratic left doesn't care, but the old does. So when you had that selection, everybody said he's young, he's dynamic, he's charismatic, he'll deliver Pennsylvania, and you will win the election. And she was told, if you support that guy, we're going to bolt in Michigan, and we're going to give a lot of trouble to you at the convention. And the question is, and by the way, he was trying to scramble to distance himself from Israel a little bit. It was kind of shameful because I knew, and I think a lot of people knew, they were never going to appoint him because they're anti-Semitic. That party is. They can't help it. They are. So he was never going to get that nod, but he kind of debased himself vis-a-vis Israel by saying things I don't think he even believed. And so, yeah, if you're a Jewish American, you're not going to be appointed in the Democratic Party. And some of your listeners will say, well, why does 70% of Jewish Americans support the Democratic Party? That's a long question. I think it's going to be more like 50-50 in this election, but I think they have to realize that a lot of Jewish Americans don't identify as Jewish. They're secular. They don't have any particular, they're like I am. I'm Swedish American, but my grandparents spoke Swedish. My grandfather did, but I don't have any attachment to Sweden. I like Sweden, but I'm not a Swedish chauvinist or a supporter. And you would think that the Jewish tie, being both religious and ethnic and historical, would be much stronger than any other, but it isn't for a lot of these people, because they feel that supporting Israel vocally is a liability career-wise in the new culturally left bi-coastal America, in the circles in which they swim.
Don't you think that, and I'm sorry for interrupting, that a lot of these Jews, for them, their identity as a progressive is much stronger than their identity as a Jew or as Jewish?
Yes, they do. And they understand that they can participate in the normal leftist cultural environment, and that means climate change, DEI, woke, New Green Deal, all of that, but not if they're overtly pro-Israel. Then they're ostracized. And that means social ostracism. They're not invited to parties. They're not put on prestigious university boards. If they go to Harvard or Yale and say, I want to give $10 million, they kind of say, well, wait a minute. That kind of stuff. And there's a lot of very prominent Jewish Americans that know that now. And so I think a lot of them are not going to vote Democratic, but I don't think, given there's only 2 or 3 million of them, and I don't know whether the donor class, the Hollywood and Silicon Valley donor class that are Jewish, will support Harris. I don't know whether the Wall Street will. They're a little bit more centrist. They're still left, but we'll see. And I don't know. That's the calculation anyway that the Democratic Party, the old hands, are making, the Pelosi's, the Schumers, and the people. people that put Biden into power. They think the Jewish vote and the Jewish donations are not as important as this young, vibrant Middle East contingent in our party, the base, and then the useful idiot young students that don't know anything, but they want to be liked and want to be in the mainstream. But
one of the things that we keep on hearing from Israelis who don't support Netanyahu, or a lot of the Israelis don't support Netanyahu, is that the Netanyahu was the one that brought Israel from being a bipartisan issue to being a partisan issue. His conduct towards the Democrats made them be very anti-Israeli or be on the fence and this and that. So do you think, because we're talking about here about the fact that they're very radical, they have this base that's so radical, it's a lot of it is anti-Semitic. Do you think that it's a false narrative that Netanyahu was supporting? They would either way be against Israel or be moving away from Israel, right?
Yeah, no, it has nothing to do. Netanyahu had spoken to Congress years ago about the Iran, and there was no hatred of Israel as there is now. No, the thing about Netanyahu is the only thing that he's doing inadvertently is it's a kind of a gift to the Israeli left, because if you had the other two, his competitors, and they had no choice because they understand Israel's in an existential. So if you had a guy like Bennett who comes over here, he's very suave and well-spoken, but he's not stupid. He knows that if you try to deal with Hamas, he would be put in a position where Netanyahu is now. But they don't have to confront that because they can say that it's both in Israel and the United States, they blame Netanyahu. But actually, from what I can understand about your politics on the questions of national defense and strategy, Netanyahu is a centrist. In fact, there's probably more people on the right that would like him to, more people, right or left, that would like him to strike Hezbollah than not. So, but he serves as a useful vessel for the left to say all the hatred of Israel is because of him, because they don't have to go out and defend Israel to Europe and the United States. If they did, then they would be subject personally to that anti-Semitic hatred, because the people on the left that are out on the street, if you watch very carefully, they don't really mention Netanyahu. Netanyahu is mentioned and derided and demonized by the elite who are in the media and the politics. That's their way of getting around, squaring their circle of selling out Israel, but not wanting to appear so. They say it's Netanyahu. The people on the street just hate Israel. And it's an existential hatred. And they don't really know who's in charge. If they say Netanyahu, fine. But if you said Baruch or Bennett, they wouldn't care. It's that bad.
How do you see the young people of the Democrat Party? We see that the old guard is more or less still supporting Israel. They say that they're against Netanyahu, but they're pro-Israel. The young people are the ones that are so against Israel and in general. And so do you think that another 15, 20 years down the line, Israelis will always be scared when a Democrat's president, and then when a Republican administration comes in, they'll be happy? Do you think that's where we're headed to?
Yeah. Well, what's happened is maybe as a result, or maybe I don't know quite all of the catalyst, is that the Republican Party, everybody says it's isolationist and everything, but when you look at the polls in the Republican Party, 75 to 80% support strong relations with Israel. So when you go back and you look at the brief Trump tenure, no other Republican president had ever said, in the next 4 years, I'm going to move the embassy to Jerusalem. I'm going to declare the Golan Heights Israelis ad internum. For internally, I am going to declare the Houthis terrorists. I'm going to get out of the Iran deal. I'm going to embargo Iranian oil. I'm going to tell the Chinese and Russians lay off out of that area. I am going to, in addition to that, cut off all money to the Palestinians, especially Hamas. He did all of that. He bragged on himself for doing it and maybe offended people, but no other Republican president would have dared to do that. They would have been afraid to, or they would have been, they're sort of the Republican Party before Trump was sort of James Baker and George H.W. Bush. They were allies of Israel, but they felt if you talk to a senior Republican diplomat and you talk to a senior four-star general, they would say to this off the cuff, yeah, I like Israel, but they're a headache because there's only 12 million, 11 million of them, and there's 500 million, and every time we go over there, all of our Arab friends in Egypt and Jordan and the Gulf say, why are you guys doing it? We like you. And so in their way of thinking, it was a headache. They had to go along. Not with Trump. He's galvanized a genuine grassroots support for Israel. And, when you look nationwide on the issues, and this is incredible given the media bias that hates Trump is analogous, if not even as vibrant as the media bias that hates Israel. And yet, when you look at the polls, they range depending on how the phrase is the question is phrased. It can be 65 to 85% support for Israel, and that can only be true. It's the old members of the Democratic Party, the vestigial class, but it's most all Republicans. So you get out of where I am, you go out where I'm in now on my farm in the center of California, and you talk to Mexican American people, you talk to poor white people, working class, they're all pro-Israel, all of them. The left says the evangelical movement is abandoning Trump. That's not true. That's just the evangelicals are still pro-Trump, but they're still pro-Israel. So what I'm trying to say is if Israel had to pick which constituency in practical terms would support it, it's very fortunate that the working classes and the pragmatic classes and the people who produce things support it overwhelmingly. Its problem is a bi-coastal 20% of the country that controls the media, the universities, K through 12, entertainment, professional sports, Wall Street, Silicon Valley. They have enormous influence in massaging the news, but they don't represent the majority of people. And they run the universities, and they still can't they always overreach. So if anything, what people see on the screens at the university repulses them. And, we have a new president in my university, and he's Jewish, American, Levin, and he's already said that he's not going to allow encampments to break university rules. Anybody who defaces and destroys property, anybody who barges into the office and ransacks it like before will be facing criminal charges. We'll see. But there does seem to be a point now that people are tiring of the demonstrations, and the election it'll be very interesting to see. But I've never seen Israel in such a dichotomy in that if the Trump administration were to come back, and if you just remember names that are being dropped as cabinet officers, Pentagon officials, State Department, Pompeo, Tom Cotton, people like that, Marco Rubio, they're all staunch supporters, and Israel would have no greater support. And if you had Harris and Walz, it would have no greater opposition, in my view. And we've never quite seen that before. And it's not from the Republican or conservative side. They're pretty much constant, if not even more. It's from the left that doesn't want to have that bipartisan consensus. They feel that they've got this colonist settler ideology that, the first thing they did at the convention was apologize to Native Americans for taking their land. And we know one thing about Native American history, that the Cheyenne, the Sioux, the Apaches, the Comanches fought over land all the time and killed each other and occupied each other's land well before anybody else came. So the land was always under dispute. And so they have this attitude about, the whole party does, they've sold out to the left colonial theory, and they look at Israel as Western and interloper, not a 3 millennia occupying soil that goes back 3,000 years.
Victor, if you've been online on Twitter, especially X, over the past few days, you've seen Candace Owens promoting anti-Semitic theories, really hardcore against Jews. And my question is, obviously she's not, she doesn't represent the whole right wing, in any sense of the word, but she is someone that has a large following, and we do see this a little bit more than I would like to. So we spoke about the left-wing anti-Semitism. Are you worried in any sense? Should we be worried about the right-wing anti-Semitism that we're seeing, and how dangerous is it?
Well, when I was growing up, I didn't meet anybody who was Jewish till I was 18. So I was in a very conservative, mostly Protestant community with ethnic Greeks or Sikhs or Armenians, but no Jews. And if there was an anti-Semitism, it was primarily on the right, say in the 1950s and 60s. And it went something like, we farmers can't make any money because all the Jews control the commodity markets and somewhere. I mean, they didn't know whether that was true or not, but they just said the Jews control all of the commodity, that kind of stuff. And the Klan, then, of course. But we're 70 years beyond that. And so a anti-Semitism movement just yesterday went and documented all of the incidents of anti-Semitic violence. And it was astounding. I thought the biggest perpetrator was self-identified Islamic group. They were second. The largest was the left. 57% were leftist. And then Islamic. And people who identified as right in that violence were 9%. 9%. So of all the anti-Semitic violence that we see, 91% is either left-wing or Islamic, and they kind of are fused, so they're almost indistinguishable on many issues. But the thing about it is, the right-wing anti-Semite is socially ostracized because his expression of anti-Semitism is far cruder and easier to identify. They either say things like, this Fuentes guy, that you guys are hanging out with the Jews, or they get into Hitlerian worship, or they wear armbands. And so they're kind of a lunatic French. And everybody understands that. They're useful for the left because the left can always say, look at them, look at them. And then that is we talked about projection. But the left wing is much more insidious. It's much more dangerous because these people have PhDs. So at my university, we had a professor, he's actually a lecturer. And he was an African-American lecturer, and he told some of the Jews to go on this side of the classroom and take your possessions and see how it feels. Well, he's DEI. You can't say that you're not supposed to say that he's biased because he's black. And the same thing with Claudine Gay and all of these female heads of Columbia or MIT or Penn. Well, wait a minute, they're in the intersectional community of gender and race, so they can't be anti-Semitic. But Stanford, where I work, just did a 1,000-page report on anti-Semitism. And most of the people, if not all, were on the left side of the spectrum that were faculty investigators. And they came to the conclusion that anti-Semitism is epidemic on the Stanford campus, that it goes unpunished, and it's almost entirely a product of the left. This is coming from liberal professors. So yes, there is anti-Semitism, and there is on the right, but it's crude, it's overt, it's unapologetic, and it's isolated and ostracized. And there is people in the fringe of the MAGA movement, like this Nick Fuentes and other people, who try to mainstream and say that they're, and to take an example, and I've known her before, but Candace Owens is another example. So she's part of the right, but she's still popular among audiences, despite, but not because of her anti-Semitism. But when you see what she's saying, she's channeling the African-American traditional conspiratorial. I say that not in necessarily a stereotype, but I'm just being empirical. So when I look at major leaders in the African-American community, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson of my generation, or Louis Farrakhan, they all have a history of Jaime Town and tell the Jews to come over with their yarmulke, and then gutter religion. They all do. And or Reverend Jeremiah Wright, the personal pastor to Barack Obama. He wrote once that the Jews have missiles that are targeting Arab Americans. They have a guidance system that goes out and finds non-Jews. So it's a left-wing thing, and it's kind of analogous to the lunatic left. There's about 10% of the left wing that's crude, 10%, but there's also the 90% anti-Semitic that's not crude. On the right, there's not any anti-Semitism in the 90%, but the 10% is crude, sort of like Farrakhan or Sharpton. And I don't want to reduce it and be reductionist, but a lot of this has to do with, I know it's reductionist, but it's the image of Israel's power. When Israel is muscular and it retaliates and it's proud and it's united, then people are attracted to it more. And the anti-Semites go quietly. But when Israel hesitates, or it is cast in self-doubt, or it reaches out to the United States, or it feels that, I'll just give you an example. I talked to two people who were not necessarily supporters of Israel the last month, and one of them said to me, my God, they killed a terrorist kingpin in Beirut, they killed one in Damascus, and they killed one in Tehran. How in the hell did they do that? How do they do that? That must mean that they have intelligence in the most intimate relations with these people, and they know, and they did it surgically. How did they do it? And while they didn't say they supported it, you could see that they were impressed by the utility of that. And so when Israel does that, and it's quiet about it, people say, you know what? This is a very, very competent, constitutional, humane society. But when they go out and say, what, can we do this? Can we not do this? Well, you're going to give us this or this. And then they fight. And then people say, well, look, they're in paralysis, or they're needy. And I think, just as an outside observer looking at Israel and visiting there a number of times, that Israel is actually in a very good position right now. And I know that 100,000 people do not have their homes, but they have the strategic ability to make Beirut look worse than 2006. And they have the same thing, that ability to do that to Iran. And if there would be retaliation, that would draw in some people on Israel's side. And these opponents know it. And so most of it is going to be sporadic attacks. But if they do an existential attack, as that they promise, they understand that will be very bad for them. And they know that they're being humiliated the longer they wait, because people keep saying, well, I thought they were going to do all this. They talk tough, because people just look at that. The one thing, of all the evil things that bin Laden said, there was one evil thing that hit the truth. None of them else did. But when he said that people gravitate to the strong horse, what he was meaning is that we got rid of this attack. Unless the United States can retaliate, then people will want to join our cause. And I think a lot of that is that people don't understand. One of the reasons they're so angry about Gaza is that we don't really hear it, but I think it doesn't take an idiot to realize that Israel's destroyed 50 to 80% of Hamas as an active group. They've got almost all of their leaders, and the ones that are left are trapped in labyrinths. They're basically persona non grata. Their longevity is not very long. Everybody knows that. They're dead men walking. And I think when Hezbollah looks at Gaza and Tehran looks at Gaza, they can see that that's what awaits them. And we don't talk about that publicly because it's taboo. But the thing is, Israel is incrementally restoring deterrence, I think. And the only strategic mistake I think it made was when they retaliated to the 320 missiles and drones. They confined it to three or four missiles, and that was under pressure of the United States and NATO allies. I think if they had expanded that, they were very clever. the planners were in showing they could penetrate defense, and it was a sign what they could do, but I think they should have done some more and told the Iranians this is a precursor of what's coming.
One of the things that, to finish off, is that a long time ago you said that America the fact that Israel didn't finish the job faster, the fact that Israel was pressured by the world community to be slow and to not finish the job as fast as it should have, was something that hurt Israel in the war in Gaza. So do you still hold that position? How do you explain it? And maybe give us a little bit of a background on where you are on this issue.
Yes, I was worried about that. I was there when you were building the wall. I think it was 2006, 7. So, and I went down and looked at Gaza later, and I talked to people about it, and they were telling me how impressive it was, because naive people like me didn't understand the sophisticated sonics and radar and drones and photographic, that it penetrated very deep in the soil. They could listen to digging. They had satellite imagery. And I was writing a book on the Theodosan walls at Constantinople that had never been breached. And I said, you need something like that, because it would show that you can't get through it physically ever. And then when you would talk to Israelis, and I have been there the last 2 years, they would say things that I thought, even people on the conservative side said, well, actually we're dealing with Hamas more than the PA. We've had a working relationship, and we got, I don't know, 10, 20,000 of them are coming in every day to work. We pay them 2 or 3 times more. If they sprain their ankle, we take them to sophisticated medical care. So insidiously, if you use that word again, and by osmosis, they're being acculturated to a culture of cooperation. And if you timidly said, but human nature being what it is, when they see how successful you are, and they see how unsuccessful they have been, they're not going to conclude that they have all this foreign aid, they have all this world support, they could be, they could be the Emirates or Hong Kong very easily, but they're not. They're going to get angry at you, because they're going to blame you for your success. And the more successful you are and the more magnanimous that you treat them, the more they're going to interpret that as laxity to be exploited rather than kindness to be reciprocated, just human nature being what it is. And I don't think the Israelis as a people, I talked to a lot of people, some in the government, and they felt that all of their existential problems had been solved. They had the most sophisticated desalinization plants. Some of them said to me, and we're even giving water to the Palestinians. We have so much of it. And we have a natural gas deal we're working on with Cyprus and Greece. We're going to supply Europe. We're going to supply Europe. We don't have a problem with energy. And tech, we have more billionaires per capita. Victor, do you know that we have a higher per capita income than the EU? That's what they would say. I said, yes. And Haifa looks like a utopia compared to our San Francisco. I went to Haifa. It was clean. People were happy. They were out at 2 a.m. I go to San Francisco. They're defecating, urinating, injecting on the sidewalk. And it's dangerous. They took paradise and destroyed it. And Israel took a city in 60 years, made it into paradise. So, but all of that, I think, gave kind of a Western laxity, affluence and leisure and success. And they thought, we've transcended war. That's kind of a primordial. And we can do that in the United States because we have 2 oceans and we have this huge population and GDP. We can do it for longer than you can. But with your population and your neighborhood, you have no margin of error. So just when you have almost a million people out protesting, or you get rumors that people are not showing up for the reservist calls, or you get this vehement anti-Israel or anti-Netanyahu or whatever from your own people, and then you're so successful, people are thinking, wow, this is kind of like San Francisco. This is kind of like the United States. These Israelis have become completely Europeanized or Americanized, and we know what happened to those guys. Yeah, and they didn't think, I think they really believed that they were going to go in there on October 7th, and there was going to be a lackadaisical response. There was, in a way, but I think they thought they could go all the way. They could stay there for 3 or 4 weeks, butcher, rape, murder. They would intimidate the population. Israel would beg under any circumstances for the hostages, humiliate itself, and then pretty much they were going to continue this. And they said they were going to continue. I don't think they had any idea that the old Israel would reassert itself and not back down in Gaza despite the American pressure. The sad thing about it just is if we had had a different administration and the administration had said to the Israelis, look, I don't know how long I can stop the pressure from the world community, but I will give you 2 months. And I will not tell you what to do, and you tell me exactly what you need as far as munitions and armament, and I will give that to you. But I can't guarantee after 2 months I can keep doing that, giving the domestic, but I think you can solve it in 2 months. But when they basically said for the first 3 weeks, please don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, we're going to cut off your bomb, you have to have a ceasefire. And, they never said that to Ukraine. They never said you have to have a ceasefire or don't have collateral damage or, they told Ukraine, suspend the constitution, outlaw political parties, cancel elections, bomb wherever you have to go, no ceasefire, on to Moscow, but not Israel. So that was the only thing that was sad, that had we done that, I think right now there wouldn't be Hamas, and Israel wouldn't have had troops in there for 9 months, and they would have been done. And then they would have turned their attention to Hezbollah, and a different administration would have just said to Iran, tell you what, we're going to keep out of it, you're going to keep out of it, and we're going to ensure you keep out of it. And if you don't keep out of it, here's a list of things that you won't like. And if we had done that, I think right now Hezbollah and Hamas would have been neutralized. Or they wouldn't have, I don't think. I mean, we haven't heard much from the Houthis because somebody in the administration said, we're tired of tit for tat and the Israelis want to take out all of their sophisticated cargo and port facilities. Let them do it. And they did it. And suddenly you hear the Houthis saying, oh, we lost $100 million of infrastructure. We can't import Iranian weapons as well. And that should show you what happens when they do. I mean, I'm not talking about gratuitous preemption. I'm talking about muscular retaliation for genocide and homicide, what they did. So I'm confident that the thinking classes of all parties in Israel will reassert themselves and we'll get through this. And I just hope that we have an administration that reverts back to 2017 and 21 through 20.
And Victor Davis Hanson, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and really hope that we'll speak to you again. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Ariel.